which means we should be proud that we are definitely of a higher standard. If we were to equal a CEO, a male or a female, we don't have the males around, so I guess you can be a little more open on this. I think we have higher standards because we have to put in that extra bit to make the difference, which probably for male, maybe the networking or an alumni will actually take him to that role much easier than us. So that's where I would like to, add, and I think my colleagues want to add.
Right, Leena, in fact, you did mention earlier that you wanted to make that point about emotional quotient, the unique advantage that we have.
Being in education, obviously, I'm studying the brain and the brain structure a lot and working out how we have to educate boys differently and girls differently because the actual brain structure is different. You spoke about multitasking. It's a given fact that whether it's because the history has pre-programmed our brain circuitry that way, but we have a much thicker corpus callosum, which actually enables us to multitask a lot better than boys. One of the dangers that men are going to face, and there are no men here to refute anything we say, so I don't know how great that is, but one of the things that men are going to have to watch out for, if you read Daniel Pink's book, Why Right-Brainers Will Rule the World, men basically tend to be left brain processing in the dominant sense, and that's why they're so good at maths and task-related and organized activities. And women tend to process more through the left and right brain, which means we have our emotional, social quotients are a lot higher, and we tend to balance the left and right brain sort of together to the completion of any outcome. And that's why when you said, that we tend to be more participative in nature, more collaborative in nature, it all comes from the way the actual brain is set up and the dominant spheres in the brain.
Okay, so let's get down to, the particular sectors that women seem to excel in. And Radhika, I'd like to ask you that question because you're in the finance vertical. I think traditionally it's assumed that women could excel in healthcare, education, FMCG and sectors like that. But do you believe we should be given another?
I think India is a very interesting example of financial services, and I can speak, globally comparing India because I spent, 5 years on Wall Street. There in the financial services sector, I worked at a fairly large hedge fund, and I was the only woman in a group of 120 people, which is pretty incredible. When you come back to India, things changed pretty drastically. I mean, ICICI was a name mentioned, but you name any foreign bank. There are a multitude of women in top-level positions. But even then, within financial services, there are I come from the money management profession, which is typically in India been a profession of, the guy sitting on the BSE, the old dalal or the stockbroker, if we can use that word. And it's not a profession where you see a lot of women. So entering this profession, yes, is still very, very challenging because it's a profession where, the soft skills that, Leena alluded to, people feel that you don't need the kind of soft skills. It's a profession about hard skills. It's about math and science and the stuff that women have not typically excelled at. But I think women are making a mark. You'll see this. There are more women in even the money management profession, whether it's shown up. The media has done a good job highlighting this. And women are doing well there because we are better negotiators. We often handle pressure much better, which is a big part of the financial services industry. We're better at developing relationships and doing tough negotiations. Just a couple of observations over the last couple of years.
Okay, let's shift the focus to entrepreneurship. Considering that you founded your own company, let's draw parallels to, how easy is it for the opposite sex to start off compared to women?
So, good morning. My name's Anisha, and I run an online company called mydala.com. And so a couple of firsts over there, which is one, e-commerce in itself is very nascent in India. We've just taken off, and it's becoming the buzzword here. So that's there, and I was one of the few. My company was the first in terms of group buying and deals in India. So that was the first there as well. I think one thing that we were talking about what we excel in. One thing that we don't excel in as women is we tend to be a lot more hesitant. And I think I see that with me. I see that with a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of women that I've talked to. We're not as shameless as men. And that is such a poor thing when you're an entrepreneur or even looking to accomplish some things in life. Because we tend to hesitate at the wrong moments, you know. So I'm not as blatant or, you know, I guess if you talk about my counterparts, and they'll go out and say whatever they feel like, and they're not as hesitant as I am, which when you go out to get funding is a big disadvantage, because you really need to talk about yourself and talk up your company. So, and I tend to see that in women. We'll always hesitate, we'll always talk a little less than a little more about ourselves. So,
the other founders on the panel, do you want to take a shot at that question?
You know, sometimes I feel, and I do agree with Anisha, we are definitely less shameless. You know, I'm a company co-founded by 2 men and a woman, and you know, both the other partners, when they're in a negotiation or when they're in a conversation, they don't think about the impact that a hard discussion may have on the relationship later. I'm much softer, so I often hold back. I'm like, if I say something really rough, you know, what is the long-term impact of this? But I think in many ways, you know, I'm coming to realize that it's a bad thing, but it's also a good thing, you know, because
I am actually the toughest negotiator, so that deal will happen when I walk out. But when you want to talk up yourself, as women, my point, I think negotiations, women do better. All my sales, the women are much better. So I have a complete bias, and I know this is being recorded, but unfortunately,
the Y factor.
Women are much better salespeople.
They're so good at negotiating. But when it comes to, if you talk to any of my sales women, they will never talk themselves up. The guys will talk about how many deals they closed, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
But when it comes to talking about ourselves and our accomplishments, we somewhere falter. Yeah. And that is the only thing that I think, and I see that in everybody, you know.
I think a lot of this has got to do with your upbringing, because even though we feel that, you know, everything we say and do is driven by a logical, conscious mind, it's actually all driven by a downloaded subconscious, which happens through our upbringing. So I think a lot of whether you are comfortable to talk about yourself or not, or to be confident or whatever else, I think a lot of it is to do with what's been downloaded in your subconscious as you've been growing up. So a lot of that's got to do more with parenting than I think the absolute difference between a male and a female.
You know, I totally agree with her, because one is the upbringing and how you've been brought up. It's also the environment. I think we must remember that it's only 30 years or 40 years since women entered the corporate world. We were not trained, or we didn't know, we didn't have role models to know how to behave. So there was a phase where women became men in the first part, and, you know, aggressive smoking, you may remember, and they said that's the best way to actually become part of the corporate world. But the environment is changing. And I think that's where the big change that has happened is, a few years ago it was all about tokenism. So gender diversity in organizations was a CSR initiative. You know, so if I have 2 women on the board, now I can go and tell people that, you know, I'm taking care, I'm a gender diverse or an equal opportunity. And if you are a woman who's sitting on the board knowing that you are there because of tokenism, you know, it's very, very difficult to handle that kind of situation. I think today it's changed dramatically. Organizations are recognizing that gender diversity equals business profitability. Forget any diversity equals business profitability. There is empirical evidence that shows that finally it has an impact on your bottom line. And therefore, with that change happening, plus more and more women in leadership roles or role models or icons already there, it's become that much easier for women to deal with working in organizations and themselves sort of balance that upbringing versus a more